I'm Sabrina Duquesne, and we have a special treat for you. On May 18th, at the Center for Brooklyn History, our team at the Bell hosted a special live taping of the Miseducation podcast to commemorate the 72nd anniversary of Brown versus the Board of Education Supreme Court decision, which outlawed school segregation. But as any listener of this podcast knows, segregation is not an issue confined to history books. New York City schools remain among the most segregated anywhere in the nation. To mark the occasion, we brought back some popular guests from previous episodes, as well as Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Nikole Hannah-Jones, for a much-needed conversation, at times emotional, at times fiery, about where we've been and what needs to change. So, we're in a beautiful event space, high ceilings, dim lights. The stage is set. More than 200 attendees, young and old, sitting shoulder to shoulder, not an empty seat. And I'm nervous because I'm the MC. I walk to the podium and take a deep breath.
I will remember those who fought for racially integrated schools and a segregated nation. Those who, rather than stand on the sidelines, took active participation. New York has one of the most segregated school systems, housing projects and economic backgrounds determining the rates of success. The school funds are unequally spread, leading to unequal resource access. Since racially and economically segregated housing leads to racially and economically segregated neighborhood schools, we can increase integration through policies that lead to more integrated neighborhoods. It's not just about me, but it's about the children we raise. And it's more than the past that we are fighting to erase, lest we forget that it's the past we must remember to face. In times of adversity, we forget that it's commonplace to ignore the problems, ignore the fact that kids need stimulation, recreational programs, resources to aid in their communication. We have a duty not only to ourselves, but to the future generation to help young minds stand steady on a solid foundation, first by taking active roles in our communities instead of supporting mere narrations. And when change is stagnant, we organize demonstrations to teach the kids that we are more than our past mistakes, that under pressure we'll persevere because we are well aware of the stakes, that despite the obstacles, despite the politics and more, that we are willing to fight this inequitable war, that the right to a proper education should be granted to all because united we stand, but divided we. Let us be remembered, not for lack of contribution, but as men and women of a society that when given problems finds solutions. Let us be remembered not as mere dwellers of the past, but as present and future thinkers whose legacies will forever last. I will remember those who fought for integrated schools in a segregated nation. Those who, rather than stand on the sidelines, took active participation. Those who are willing to fight for students to go to quality schools regardless of learning mode. Those who understand that obtaining an education should not be determined by performance, race, tax bracket, or zip code. I will remember those who will fight to ensure that they are well informed. And I will remember those who are willing to help change the system that we undeniably formed. Thank you. Thank you. Hi, guys. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sabrina Duquesne, and I am the student program manager at the Bell. And the Bell is a nonprofit organization that is building the next generation of journalists and civic leaders. What I just shared was an excerpt of a spoken word poem that I wrote when I was 17 and in high school and a part of Teens Take Charge, a student-led advocacy group that was housed under the Bell at the time. And during that time, I was trying to put words to the patterns that I had seen in my own life when I was attending segregated schools. So it felt really fitting to return to that poem tonight as we gather on the 72nd anniversary of Brown v. Board for an intergenerational conversation about school segregation, equity, and the unfinished promise of public education. So we're gonna get to it. And our first speaker is Chancellor Kamar H. Samuels. Whew. So Chancellor Samuels is a veteran educator with over 2 decades of experience in New York City public schools. He began his New York City public school career as an elementary school teacher in the Bronx, where he later served as principal of the Bronx Writing Academy and went on to serve as superintendent in both Brooklyn's District 13 and Manhattan's District 3. As chancellor, he now leads the nation's largest school system. And while he lives in Manhattan, he did tell us that his favorite borough is, drumroll please, the Bronx, the Boogie Down Bronx. But he's here tonight, and we're gonna give him a warm Brooklyn welcome. Woo.
Wow. All right, Sabrina, seriously, that was great. I have to say that, maybe my number one job now is to make sure that you remember me, right? Because those things that you want to remember, I think I want to live up to. And I often say the hardest part of this job sometimes is being asked to talk after our mayor. But I think you're giving him a run for his money today. Listen, so so good evening. I'm honored to be a part of this event. Truly, I'm so excited to be back in Brooklyn, but not only back in Brooklyn, but back in Brooklyn talking about school integration. As a former superintendent in District 13, I am truly, truly honored to be not just here, but always still in service of, where for me it really started, this journey in thinking about school integration and the impact on schools. So thank you to the Center for Brooklyn History and to the folks who got me here. So the truth about why I'm here is these young people at the Bell, they're very, very, they're tricky. They're very tricky. So I'm doing an interview with them, and out of nowhere, they're like, "So we're doing this thing for Brown versus Board, and it's the 72nd anniversary, and would you want to come?" And at first I hesitated a little bit, and they're like, "Well, Nikole Hannah-Jones will be there." I was like, "All right." I was like, if Nicole's there, then I'm there. And so here I am. And I really do need to shout out Nikole, because one of the reasons I was drawn to this work is, I was sitting in my office at Tweed at the time. I worked in the central office before coming to Brooklyn. And I read the article that she wrote about Naja and her school experience. And I was at that time going from city to borough in the evenings, working on school closures, mergers, and so on. And, there was just so much pain in communities around schools, and the segregation of our schools was clear to me. And so when I put it in that context, I figured at the time I didn't come into education to be doing that work. What I came into doing was to working in schools. And so I took a school-facing role as deputy superintendent, then became superintendent of District 13. Lo and behold, one of my parents was Nikole Hannah-Jones. And so I continued that work. And I want to thank you, Nikole, for just being, for me in my life, a living legend and somebody who I really look up to. I really look up to your work daily. So it feels especially meaningful to talk about integration 72 years after Brown. But on the other hand, it pains me that we're still talking about this. And this conversation needs to be had even 7 decades later. And on the other hand, if we aren't talking about it, if we're not having the conversation, then it definitely is not going to be addressed. And so in this moment, it's important for all of us to continue to speak up. When I think about any conversation around race, we know it starts with the personal, local, and immediate. To me, this work is deeply personal, and I'd go as far as saying I'm sure it's personal for everyone in this room. Some of us attended segregated schools. Some of us never saw ourselves in our teachers or the histories and the narratives that we were taught. And some of us are parents of children who we want to raise in a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy. And as an educator and as an education leader for over 2 decades, my belief in the power of truly integrated schools has only grown. When our school communities are diverse in their learning environments, all students can feel seen, honored, and celebrated. All students and educators from every background have lived experience to be shared and valued. And all students feel a sense of belonging. That is critically important to me. And this work is particularly important as we are facing a highly polarized society. If our young people are connecting with people across difference for the first time in a dorm room or in the workplace, we would have done them a serious disservice. And so in this work, we need to make sure that we recognize that our future depends on our students being more empathetic and being really strong critical thinkers. There's no place better for that to take place than in an integrated classroom when done well. I'm in this work for my own 2 kids, right, who are in public schools right now and want to come soon. And I am in this work because public education is a foundation of our democracy, a place where young people learn to be active members of a diverse society. Since I became Chancellor in January, I've been talking about true integration, which for some people, they think is revolutionary. That is one of the top of my priorities. I use this phrase true integration very purposefully. To me, it's about, of course, diversity in every sense of the word. Racial, linguistic, religious, ethnic, and neurodivergence as well. And the list goes on. It's about ensuring our classrooms, our students, our teachers reflect the beautiful multiculturalism of our city. But for me, this also goes beyond demographics. It's about the full school experience, making sure our kids graduate with as well-rounded citizens of the world. It's about culturally responsive, interdisciplinary teaching, and this must be the core expectation, not an add-on. We need to ensure all our students have access to rigorous, standards-based, identity-affirming curricula that reflects their lived experience. And there's no better example of how we get to all of these things than what Sabrina talked about, the work of Teens Take Charge and others, when we think of the 5 R's for real integration, right? That's something that has guided my approach. You know, while we're doing that, we have to make sure that we're exposing our young people to a fuller, more honest account of history and civic life from multiple perspectives. You know, at NYCPS, to advance both equity and excellence, we are building a coherent instructional platform that is truly culturally responsive. Through our K-8 social studies and civics portfolio, including Passport and Passport Social Studies, Civics for All, Hidden Voices, along with incredible curricula like the Black Studies curriculum and the Latinidad curriculum to come. Looking ahead, we want to see culturally responsive, but not only culturally responsive curriculum in isolated classrooms, but we want that fully embedded across the grades, subjects, and as a system as a whole. We are committed to true education, student voice, and preparing students to be actively participating in a global democracy. Now, I was in a civics classroom not long ago when they were doing the First Amendment. And, you know, one child, this is a 4th grade classroom. They're doing the First Amendment, and one child goes, you know, you should be able to say whatever you want, just as long as it doesn't hurt my feelings. And then the other kid goes, but what if I'm telling the truth? And so So I'm looking at the kids and I'm looking at the teacher, and the teacher is getting a little nervous as she's approaching the kids, trying to help them facilitate the conversation. And for me, I think it's critical that in that moment, our teachers get resources for helping our young people to connect. That's the kind of connection across difference that we have to and we must continue to promote. And so true integration is also about having a robust, vibrant, impactful, enriching classroom environment. And this is why we have to take a look at our under-enrolled schools that are hyper-segregated in our system, right? Because as they are under-enrolled, they are also underfunded. There is not enough funding that the system will put towards many of these schools, even with concentration weights and otherwise. And we have to ask ourselves, how do we get our young people connected and in robust environments so that they can get the rich resources that we know that we have? It connects, and we want to make sure, and this is connected to my two priorities of safety and academic rigor. We cannot continue to spread the thinking that we are sacrificing academic rigor somehow and sacrificing safety when we explore and when we look for integrated schools. When our schools are truly integrated, our students feel a strong sense of belonging and experience very deep learning. Here in New York City, we know we have a lot of work to do to achieve a truly inclusive, equitable democracy where young people of all backgrounds have the opportunity to be supported and thrived. The good news is we have educational models drawn from right here in Brooklyn and elsewhere. And we need to make sure that we are working to expand on those models. The invitation here today is for us to keep going as if this is for our democracy, as if our democracy depends on it, because it does, right? Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. This work is truly transformative. I am proud to be a part of it, and I'm now proud to be leading, yes, the largest public school system in the country towards a more equitable, more integrated space. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Chancellor Samuels, for grounding us with those remarks. Can we give the Chancellor room a round of applause? Yeah, thank you. I'm now going to transition from MC to podcast host. As many of y'all know, we are recording tonight's conversation for the Miseducation podcast, which has covered the issue of sports equity for several years, and I'm excited to host this conversation. So we have these special guests here tonight who are joining us as we reckon with the reality that segregation is not just a part of New York City's history, but it continues to shape students' daily lives. And these three have challenged these inequities and made real progress. So I'm excited to welcome back to the Miseducation podcast these three awesome folks here. And I'm going to give you guys a chance to go ahead and introduce yourselves. David, I'm going to kick it to you first. So please introduce yourself and your connection to the issue of sports equity.
All right, so my name is David Garcia Rosen. My connection to the issue is throughout my career, I've seen the power of sports and how it could transform students' lives. When I think about the issue, I always think about two students, Carlos and Argenis. They had dropped out of high school, and they heard we started a baseball team, our own baseball team. The PSAL wouldn't let us. We'll get to that. But they came back in. We said, okay, you want to come back to school? Well, you got to be a student first and an athlete second. They were like, we'll do it. They came back. They graduated, they won the baseball championship, and I think that that shows this is not a sports or a recreation issue. This is actually an issue that could change the trajectory of a student's life.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jill Bloomberg. Thank you. I have spent over 30 years in public school education, 15 of them as the principal at Park Slope Collegiate, a small school in the John Jay building, where we worked very hard to build precisely the kind of anti-racist integrated school that the Chancellor referred to. But it wasn't always easy. And one of the hiccups that we faced as we were fighting racism by building an integrated school was the issue of sports teams, but we will get to that one later as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Renika Jack. I'm connected to this because I was a student at Cyber Arts Studio Academy in the John Jay building. I was there during the first year of the sports merger, and I also worked on the Keeping Score series, which covered the sports merger.
So, David, I'm going to come to you first. We're going to do a little New York City schools trivia. So, what is the Public School Athletic League, or PSAL, and how does it work? And then, when did you first encounter the PSAL?
So I first encountered the PSAL when I was at another small segregated school, Marie Curie High School in the Bronx. We had no sports teams, and the kids kept asking me for sports. They knew I love sports. And so I was like, all right, let me figure out, how do you get a sports team at a school that has no sports? I was kind of surprised that there was such a thing. And so they were like, oh, it's the PSAL. So I called the PSAL and I was like, hey, like, we need a soccer team. They were like, well, you can't have one. I was like, we have a baseball team. They're like, well, you can't have one. Basketball team, well, you can't have one. They're like, why don't you ask for something that no one wants, like a cricket team? And I was like, okay. So I told the baseball players about cricket. I was like, it's kind of like baseball. And we started a cricket club. And then I called them and I was like, all right, we're ready for our cricket team. And they're like, you can't have one. So the PSAL was founded in 1903. It's the oldest interscholastic sports league in the country. Its mission was to provide students with the opportunity to play sports, to keep them out of trouble, keep them academically engaged, and it's a great mission, but sadly, to this day, they continue to prioritize the larger schools, the schools with more white and Asian kids, and continue to create systems that just don't work for our segregated small schools. So that's the PSAL.
Starting off high. So we're about to play a clip from the 2018 Miseducation podcast episode, Who Gets to Play? And in this clip, David started doing a little bit of research. So let's play that.
By this time, David had started his own research project to dig into the PSAL data.
I literally thought I was going to compare small schools to big schools. I was going to say, like, here's a big school, they have 40 teams. Here's a small school, they have 0 teams. There's your problem, Donald. Let's fix this. But when I started doing my very first Excel spreadsheet, because I had never done one, I started looking at the columns and I was like, like, these small schools all appear to be in certain neighborhoods. They also all appear to be in the Bronx. And so now, having spent my life in New York City, I was like, let me add some columns to this spreadsheet.
He saw drastic disparities in access to sports teams, not just by school size, but by race.
And I had my very first time, I learned how to, like, take an Excel thing and turn it into a bar graph. You know, I didn't really know how to do that. And it was like a moment where I was like, holy shit, this is big.
All right, so y'all probably heard me. That's Sabrina in embryo, and David in this clip. It kind of feels like a eureka moment, right? So I would love if you could take us back there and just tell us, like, what did you discover, and then what did you do about it?
So yeah, like, I was genuinely surprised. My initial hypothesis was like small schools versus big schools. Small schools don't have sports. I thought it was going to be really easy. I was going to show the DOE, like, hey, look at all these small schools, they have no sports, and they would do the right thing. And yeah, I discovered that 17,000 Black and Latino students were at segregated high schools with no sports teams at all. Tens of thousands more students were at schools with like 1 or 2 teams. So, you know, basically no access most of the school year. And yeah, when I did my first bar graph, I like ran into the principal's office and I was like, you're not gonna believe this. And I was showing her, like, you know, the bars of like white students and how many teams they had. And then I was showing her the bars of like Black and Latino students and how many teams they had. And it was like a moment where I was like, oh man, this is a civil rights issue. This is not just like some of my students don't have sports. And so what I did was I put a big report together, which was not something that I really intended to do or knew how to do. And I genuinely thought when I brought it to the DOE and the Public School Athletic League that they were gonna just be like, oh, thanks for bringing this to our attention. Like, we're gonna do the right thing and fix this. So naive, but instead we had our first meeting with the CEO of the PSAL, Eric Goldstein, in federal prison, but whatever, we'll talk about that. We don't talk about that. But he took my research and he rolled it up and he was like, there will be no Marxist redistribution of sports in New York City. And like, he's just bugging out. And I was like, oh my God. And so, yeah, again, I walked into that meeting thinking that we were gonna just be like, okay, like, so yeah, you know, we're gonna put some more teams here and take some teams there. So yeah, I mean, it went from there, and I think the heart of it is that they just kept denying the kids the right to play. So yeah, I started my own league, the Small Schools Athletic League. It started very small with just a few schools playing soccer, and within a year we had 47 DOE high schools, hundreds of teams, and then again we brought it to the DOE and we're like, hey, this is really your job, like I'm a dean at a high school, like I'm not really running a sports league. And again, they were just like, no, and that's when the students organized themselves into NYC Let 'em Play, and we started working on King's 6 Steps of Nonviolent Social Change, and the kids and the students took it from there. One of them's here. He's not a kid anymore, though.
And that's a great segue into our next clip. Let's play that.
It's March 25th, 2015, City Hall. About 100 students dressed in black file into the chamber as the education budget hearing is getting started. They're wearing black gloves and carrying a banner that says Civil Rights Matter. David is right there beside them.
All the 10 leaders were all the way in the bottom. So once the hearing started, Chancellor Ferrier started talking, we stand up and we started talking, and the security came in, they kicked us out. They were even trying to arrest some of us.
Segregated high school. Let's go. Folks, if you do not leave the chambers, you will be arrested. Walk out of the chamber.
Your PSAL is separate and unequal.
After that, we all chant, Civil Rights Matter.
Civil Rights Matter. Civil Rights Matter. Civil Rights Matter. Civil Rights Matter.
The students hold their fists in the air as they're being escorted out of the chambers.
So, David, what is happening in this scene? And what was the aftermath? Yeah.
So like what you're hearing in that scene was a group of students taking like a real personal risk to fight for something that we should have just been given to them, right? If you're a white student at Tottenville High School in Staten Island, you have 44 sports teams funded by the same DOE, that students like Shafu had to leave school, be threatened to be arrested in City Hall because they were asking to play soccer and have one team at their school. And, you know, what really troubles me is the DOE's reaction over and over and over again, right? They suspended me, put me in the rubber room for 5 months, threatened the students with suspension and arrests, and threatened them not to keep protesting. And what really worries me is we're slipping back into that vibe again with the DOE. Not, you know, over the past few years, even though they settled the case, the federal civil rights case, the leadership at the PSAL, you know, it's the same people that were putting data out that the New York Times called a statistical delusion at the time, where they were trying to be like, no, everyone has access to sports. And those leaders are back now deprioritizing small schools and segregated schools. So in 2023, they announced the All Access program. It's a great fanfare, and it was a big deal. Every kid in New York City now had access to every sport, but the leadership at the PSAL now has renamed it the Access program. They're once again putting false narratives out and false data saying that there's no problem here, that everyone has sports, but there's a deep problem because small schools are getting smaller with declining enrollment. Even the few teams that we have, we can't actually compete. My school had baseball team 4 years ago that won a championship, and today we don't even have enough players to field a team. And that's going on all over the city. And instead of the leadership at the PSAL and the DOE being creative and saying we have a problem here, they're back to their same old ways of denying there's a problem. And if you can't say there's a problem, then we're not going to solve it. And I'm worried that once again, students like Shafu are going to have to be running to City Hall fighting for sports access, which is crazy.
Thank you, David. We've been in the 2010s, and that's sort of where we've been so far. And we're going to stay there, but we're actually going to cross from the Bronx into Park Slope. Same time, different borough. Jill, you had your own journey encountering this issue. So I'd love if you could start by telling us about your former school, Park Slope Collegiate, and the John Jay campus. And I'd love if you could give the audience a little bit of context into the structure of the John Jay campus and all the schools within it. Yeah.
Sure. And you may realize this was plugged as an intergenerational conversation. It took me a minute to realize what end of the spectrum I was representing. And so I'll take advantage of that and say that sort of the context of my own journey at Park Slope Collegiate is rooted in the history of schools and civil rights. And I want to take a minute, because we are honoring the 72nd anniversary of the Brown decision, to talk a little bit about that history. From the moment that the decision was made, I'm going to go way back, to base slavery on race, racism became the foundation of inequity in this society. And immediately, people began to fight back. And that fight back has always been the fight against racism. And so decades before the Brown decision in 1954, the fight for civil rights focused on the fight against Jim Crow segregation in the South and segregation in the North as well. And school leaders and school students and their parents were critical in that fight against racism. And they pushed like crazy to fight back against Jim Crow, to fight back against segregation, and to fight for desegregated integrated schools. And when that happened in 1954, it was a huge victory, one that was rightly celebrated. But everybody involved in the fight against racism recognized that desegregating schools was a necessary but insufficient condition for fighting racism. Getting the kids all together in one school was the first step, not the last step. And we learned a lot about the ways in which celebrating only the desegregation and not fighting against racism meant that hundreds and hundreds of Black principals and Black teachers lost their jobs. The creation of tracked classes integrated or desegregated schools, but created second-generation segregation inside them. And so we had this period of celebration followed by somewhat of a backlash. I'm getting the sign, so I'm going to jump. The reason that's important is that when I became the principal of Park Slope Collegiate, which had a different name, in 2004, I wasn't thinking very much about school integration, a lot like David's story. I wanted to serve the students who were there, who were predominantly Black and Latino students in a already gentrified white community. And we fought like crazy to build a school that served our students. And we thought we were doing it really well. We kept encountering all sorts of difficulties. The roof was leaking. The science lab needed to be renovated. And we did all of these things. And we built what we considered to be a really good school. But then we were told by the Department of Education that a new school was going to be moved into the building, and that this new school, called Millennium Brooklyn, would be a selective school because the neighborhood of Park Slope, zip code 11215, was underserved.
So we actually have a clip from the Keeping Score series that the Bell did in collaboration with WNYC, and we actually want to play that clip right now.
The pushback culminated in January 2011 at a public meeting where a panel mostly appointed by the mayor was going to vote on letting Millennium in or not. Teachers and parents were scattered around in this giant auditorium. Everyone got 2 minutes to speak, including Jill Bloomberg, one of the principals.
And they had this big clock up on the stage,
which would start counting down whenever someone spoke.
and then I gave my presentation.
Work with the schools in the building to create a heterogeneous student population that reflects the true diversity of New York City, Brooklyn.
But suddenly, her mic was cut.
My time was not up. So school administrators all know how to use what is often referred to as our cafeteria voice.
We invite you to join us in building something new on the John Jay campus together. Integration, yes. Segregation, no.
But it didn't seem to matter. The panel voted unanimously to approve Millennium coming in. One John Jay teacher called the hearing a rubber stamp. Renovations got underway. The water fountains were fixed, floors redone, roof repaired. The four schools would share common areas, like a library and a cafeteria. They'd even share the gyms. But not everything would be shared.
Ominous. So Jill, it's okay to spoil it. What happened?
Well, the first thing that happened is I got called into the office by my superintendent. Apparently, principals are not supposed to, or at least at the time, call for school integration. But Millennium moved in. We never had anything against the students or the teachers at Millennium. We greeted them on the first day of school with a flyer welcoming them. The teachers in the John Jay building invited the teachers to Millennium to go out on a Friday. But what changed is that there were 3 schools already in the John Jay building, and we shared sports teams. When Millennium moved in, they decided not to join the sports teams on the campus. Instead, they wanted to join sports teams with Millennium Manhattan. And frankly, at the moment, we were tired. We'd fought very hard. We hadn't won that particular battle, though I couldn't have been prouder of our school community, or so I thought. And we said, okay, fine, you do your thing, we'll do ours. But what happened is that one thing the Supreme Court got right is that separate will never be equal, and it wasn't. So like David's experience, we kept asking for teams. We wanted a soccer team, no. We wanted a baseball team, no. We wanted a boys volleyball team, no. And then one day I was in my office and our middle school volleyball coach came in and said, how come we can't use the gym? I said, I don't know, how come you can't use the gym? She said, well, the stunts team, Millennium stunts team is practicing. I was like, what is a stunts team? It's cheerleading. I didn't know. But I'm like, they have a stunts team? And I went on the PSAL website to look and realized that Millennium Brooklyn and Millennium Manhattan had 17 sports teams to our 4. And I'd had it in the same way that we had it when the DOE told us that Millennium was moving in and there was nothing that we could do about it. And so I wrote a letter to Eric Goldstein, who was not yet in federal prison, requesting that he combine the sports teams on the campus because separate will never be equal. And then a month later, I was visited by investigators telling me that I was under investigation for communist organizing. And so, as you can see, while I really support and am really gladdened to hear a chancellor stand up and say that integration is a priority, my experience and David's experience is that when you fight for integration, the DOE slaps you down. And that has to change. What happened is that our school rallied again, as people will often do, have always done in history, and I am sure will continue to do, to unite in the fight against racism. And while schools have often been the center of both desegregation and civil rights, they've also been the site, as we saw from this young man, of very tremendous courage and multiracial unity and fight back. I think that Renika's going to take it from here.
Yeah. Whew. Thank you, Joe. And while Park Slope Collegiate's advocacy did not produce an immediate change, eventually, in late 2020, the John Jay campus finally decided to merge its sports teams. Which brings us to you, Renika. You not only experienced this merger as a student, but you also reported on it for the Miseducation podcast. Yeah. And you bring, I think, one of the most important perspectives here. So I'm curious, what was your experience like as a student in the John Jay campus pre-merger?
So pre-merger, I went to Cyber Arts Studio Academy, which was on the first floor. We were, we are still a small school of mostly Black and Latino students. Small population. I moved here in 2019 and I started school in September. You could ask me what sports team we had and I couldn't tell you. We had no coach pushing us to join a team. We had no coach saying, hey, if you ever wanted to do track, if you ever wanted to play soccer. We had students playing soccer in the lunchroom when it was our time, or if they couldn't use the gym. If they couldn't use the gym, they had to use the lunchroom, and if they couldn't use the lunchroom, they get sent down to the gym. Sometimes they had the smallest corner, just kicking around the soccer ball, not even able to play the way that they could or the way that they want. I don't even think that those students would know if we had a soccer team, if we had one. And so we were the inferior school, in my opinion. We were the little guy. Most times, we had Millennium students passing through our schools, and it was just like a wind. They would just walk through, they go to the auditorium, or they take up the gym, and it was pretty sad.
So we actually have a clip that shows a little bit of the early days around the start of the merger, and we'd love to play that.
Last fall, as students returned to the building after a year of remote learning, everyone was invited to something called Jaguar Day, a pep rally in the auditorium to bring all 4 schools together.
And I was very interested because at first I thought, that should be really fun. So I was trying to get friends to go with me.
Renika and her friends watched as a cheerleader got on the stage.
She was screaming on top of her lungs, trying to fill the whole auditorium with her voice. And it was like, okay, wow, okay.
And then a coach came to the front and tried to get kids to chant this new slogan.
We are one.
We are one.
And we only become the strongest bamboo tree in the world by taking care of each other. You are Jaguars.
I think at the end of it, they were trying to get us to be like, all stand up and say it from your chest. We are one. And it was like, we are one. The kids were just there like, no, we're not.
So Renika, what's happening in this clip, and also what happened next, right? How did the sports merger play out?
So in this clip, they had us all come to the auditorium. They were like kids from Millennium. I think they were passing out flyers for Jaguar Day, and they already had on the merch shirts. And they were talking about integrating the sports and how we are now one community, and we all have, equal opportunities, and we're all going to play together and win together, and we are one. That's the new slogan, apparently, that John Jay was going by. So after that, that we had the coach. He ended up being my track coach. He was on the stage and he was like, say it from your chest, like, let's all stand together, and we're now joined. And then they're like shotgunning t-shirts into the crowd. But after that, it remained the same. I mean, Cyber Art Studio remained Cyber Art Studio Academy. We didn't know what teams were available. We didn't even know, well, how was the first thing that you had to do to be able to join a team. There was no one that reached out to the little guy to let them know, hey, so you now have opportunity to have us to join a soccer team, to join a track team. I took it upon myself, and I had spoken to one of my PE teachers, and I was like, what if I want to join a team? How do I do that? And he sent me to another coach, which I tried out, and I joined the team during the merger. And it was like, okay, now I'm a part of the team, and it's just like they try to make us seem as one, but there were segregations even among the team because there were obviously children from different schools. I was the only one from Cyber Art Studio Academy on the track team, which had a lot of students from PSC, Millennium, from law, and it was kind of, felt a little left out. But after that, it still remained the same. The students were still playing the soccer in the gym or in the cafeteria. They weren't joining the team because I don't even think they know, even after the merger, that there was like a soccer team.
So, Renika, you also, you graduated from high school, right? A few years ago. I'm curious, what is happening in your life right now and what is next for you?
So next for me, next Friday, I will be walking across the stage with my bachelor's in psychology. Thank you. And, I've come the long way doing keeping score and being there during that time of the merger. After me, my sister did go to Cyber Art Studio Academy, and she was able to join a volleyball team, and she was able to, play with the other students. But, my sister would have never known what a merger would have been like if I never told her, like, hey, before, if you weren't here, you would have had no team to join. You had no volleyball. You would probably be running around in the gym. But for now, I'm glad to see how far we've come and to continue having this conversation because more small schools need to, the recognition and to need the same equal opportunities just as any other school in New York City.
All right. So in the interest of time, to wrap up this conversation, it's going to be our final question. I'm going to come back to David. So a lot has changed since the initial reporting, and there has been some progress, right? And I'm curious, what has changed and what hasn't?
So there's definitely been progress, right? There's hundreds of teams at small schools that didn't exist when we started this fight, and there's students all over the city that are playing. The DOE settled the civil rights lawsuit, but not surprisingly, they didn't implement it with fidelity. They delayed, they stalled, and we're now sadly slipping backward again, where there's so many students in New York City that don't have equitable access to the public school athletic league. They've brought leadership back. The leader of the PSAL now told me and my principal 15 years ago that if we wanted sports at our school, we shouldn't have opened up a small school. And now he's in charge of the PSAL again and deprioritizing the things that would bring access to sports to small schools. And so what hasn't changed is our schools are still segregated. Our students are still at small segregated schools that are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And the DOE needs to take a real serious look at the unintended consequences of the small school movement and realize that it didn't work. You can't provide equitable education to Black and Latino students in a junior high school building with 200 kids and provide a vibrant, equitable high school education. So that experiment failed, and we have to recognize that and move our kids into buildings where they could have access to sports and arts and an auditorium and a field and a gym. I'm tired. I've been in the DOE for 28 years, and I'm tired of my students being in middle school buildings. I'm a high school teacher that don't have fields, don't have gyms, don't have sports teams. You cannot do it. They need to stop. The small school movement did not work. It did not work.
And with that, please give our panelists a big round of applause. Right?
Following the conversation about segregation in sports, our student reporter Aponi took the stage with Nikole Hannah-Jones. Here's Aponi.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Aponi Kafele. I'm a high school senior at Essex Street Academy, a public school. And yes, those are definitely my teachers in the audience. Hi, y'all. I'm so excited to be sitting here with our lovely guest, Nikole Hannah-Jones. I'm a longtime fan. Nikole Hannah-Jones is an investigative reporter and entrepreneur. She's currently a staff writer for the New York Times, and in addition to being the creator of the Pulitzer Prize-award-winning 1619 Project, which is a book that chronicles American history through the lens of its connections to slavery. She began her journalistic career reporting on education, specifically documenting the racial and class disparities prevalent in our U.S. school system. One of her significant essays on school segregation is called Choosing a School for My Daughter in a Segregated City, which is celebrating its 10-year anniversary. In this piece, you paint a picture of the most segregated city in America, New York City. It's been 10 years, again, since you wrote that New York Times piece. Can you explain to us the premise of the essay?
Good evening. Good evening. Hello. First of all, I just really want to commend David and Jill. I hadn't met David before, but Jill is an icon to me, and one of the few truly anti-racist educators that was willing to put it all on the line for equity in education. And it's kind of like a reunion, right? So many of us, Taylor, students from Teens Take Charge, coming together. But I have to say, hearing that conversation on stage, I feel so sad. Just feels like 10 years later, so little has changed. So I don't know why I'm feeling emotional. When David was talking about the conditions in the school, it just made me think that this is what led to Brown, right? That our children being forced into middle schools, our children being treated in such an undignified way. And, we spend so much time in 2026 talking about MAGA and Trump and looking down on the real racists. And yet here we are in this blue liberal city that loves to pat itself on the back. And millions of students, or hundreds of thousands of students, are being told every day that they don't matter. And the students who are deprived of everything else, and we won't even let them play a fucking sport. I just feel irate right now. So thank you, because that's how we should be feeling. And it's kind of good to sit in that again for a second. I don't remember your question. I just feel so much rage at that. And that 10 years later, we haven't moved the needle at all. And in fact, I was surprised to see a room packed on this issue, because it seems like 10 years ago, there was so much momentum. People were talking about this issue every day. Students were rising up and getting organized. And we just got crushed under the same forces that have crushed this issue generation after generation, and we just will not deal with it. And it's not enough for us to sit in a room and shake our heads and be sad about what we are allowing to be done and what we continue to allow to be done to students who just deserve better. So that was the premise of the piece 10 years ago. You know, my very first job was an education reporter in Durham, North Carolina, right after No Child Left Behind became federal legislation. I was a cub reporter. I was just learning journalism. And that's probably the best time to cover something like education because I don't know anything. I haven't been indoctrinated into anything. I'm just looking at what they're saying and I'm looking at the results and they're not matching. Mm-hmm. And so I'm trying to understand how we have policy that isn't seeming to get at the thing that I know is causing the inequality in the schools. So I had been writing and thinking about school segregation, and I'm talking about class and race, because middle-class Black parents are now also taking their part in this system to leave our poor Black children behind. So I was writing about these things, and then I had, moved to New York City, and I had a child. And anybody in here who has a child knows one of the first conversations someone has to you, if you're middle class, if you have options, is, well, what are you going to do about your child's school? Mm. My child was 1 year old when we moved here. I'm like, I'm literally not thinking about it at all. And people are like, no, you have to think about it right now. And so the piece was really about the pressures that we face as individual parents and the systems of inequality. I had written a lot about school segregation in the South. And again, people in the North love to look down at the South about how backwards and, oh, thank God we're not there. And I was like, all the most segregated school districts are in the North, all of them. And so I really had been wanting to do a story about school segregation in the North, really to call out the liberal hypocrisy. And then I find my daughter in the middle of a school integration battle. I enrolled her, my husband and I enrolled her in a high poverty segregated school, PS 307. PS 307 in the house, okay. And of course at that time, PS 8 was overcrowded, probably still is, and they were talking about sending some of those parents, those kids to our school. And I got to see every ugly thing that you can imagine some white racists in the South saying. They were Brooklyn liberals saying that about my kid's school. Mm-hmm. So that's what the piece was about this enduring struggle for people to live up to their stated values, about what makes integration so hard. Once you have so much inequality, integration becomes impossible. And both a personal story about my husband and my choice and the larger systems that we all are pulled into.
I think a part of your story, listen, it's a complex piece. I think when I was looking at it, I'm also someone who was at that same kind of crossroads in my education. Of course, credits to my parents, they handled this when I was very, very young. But I was facing that choice of, do I go to this white private school, very, to use a kind of crude term, fly in a bowl of milk, or do I go to a more diverse public school? And I ended up going the private school route. And I was there at a private school from kindergarten to middle school. And then it affected the high school. It's like, oh, I think I need a break. But it really made me think about the values that you had for your daughter in that moment. And this very personal decision to make that leap and be more community-based, or more community-based on how you saw your daughter's future. And you were talking about also your conversation with your husband around these two converging values of what you want for your daughter versus what you saw her as is more of a part of this fabric or community. You talk about, again, not really seeing the needle move 10 years later, and about this feeling of complete unsatisfaction that you have with the system, seeing as it hasn't changed. Would you still, you think, make the same choice for your daughter 10 years later?
Yes. I absolutely would still make the choice. I think we're still called to make the choice. I mean, what the choice was about is having values versus living the values that you have. Mm-hmm. And it's always easy to state a value when you don't actually have to be confronted with the value. So of course I would make the same choice. I mean, to me, the choice was always, it wasn't a naive choice. Again, I had been covering school segregation at that point for 15 years. I knew all the reasons why you're not supposed to, if you're a good parent, send your child voluntarily into a segregated high poverty school. I knew all of that. And I had no naive expectation that my going into a school would transform a school or a system. I knew that wouldn't happen either. But I also felt like we just constantly, therefore, used that as an excuse, right? So a single decision, you cannot rely on individuals. We have to have systemic changes. The changes have to come from the top, but that doesn't absolve us of our individual choices either. And I think that is what I tried to do, was to understand I had to both live my value and hope I could bring some other people along with me, but use my life and my child and our ability to have choice to try to shine a light on this larger system that we had all accepted, right? Because that's what everyone said. Well, I agree with it. I agree with it in theory, but I can't sacrifice my child. So the question in the piece, the question I still ask then is, whose child is worthy of the sacrifice? You know, now I will say we're 10 years out, and wait for the update, because we're revisiting this now because I have a 16-year-old. And we're actually I'm working on an essay now, I'm working on a This American Life piece where I interview her. She feels, as you can imagine, quite differently about the choice I made. And I had to give her space to feel that. And so to see 10 years later, the landscape of school integration to me is actually worse. We know they're slated to close a bunch of schools. They only ever close our schools. The power dynamics of who we're trying to serve and keep in the district have not changed. I was personally, you know, when Mandami was elected, my husband and I, who is on the citywide school board, also is a tremendous advocate for equity and integration. We were watching to see who was Mandami going to choose for chancellor, because that was going to tell you everything about the direction around this issue. And I have to say, we were pleased that it was we call him Kamar, Chancellor Samuels, because he had long actually worked on the issue of integration. It wasn't a secondary issue or something that he just gave lip service to. But the problem is, once you become chancellor, you're no longer just an academician, right? You're a politician. And so this is why I never want to go into politics, right? Because politics mean you have to compromise. And the truth is, I can't say what's going to happen, but I can say, based on everything I know about history, what will likely be the result is that who is the brunt of the compromise always? It's always the same communities. It's always the same people. One person, it's very hard for one person to change a system, because in truth, the right people are not behind the change.
Yeah.
And so without the right people behind the change becomes very impossible. If you work really hard on this issue, you don't stay in the job very long.
I think even looking at your piece and talking about the difference between the same voices in the room holding different kinds of weight, I wonder also, you were going to different schools, specifically in your piece about the segregated schools in the South, and you're saying that they had instituted these like individual programs that were focused on almost that same idea of like small changes in schools to close this achievement gap. But you noted that these programs weren't working to create sustainable change. Again, connecting back to like the small individual versus big systemic. What do you think that was holding these smaller programs back from bringing the school to this like place of equality? Because I see that in New York is like all these small changes. In my school, which is a smaller school and a building is super big ones, it's like we get these little things. But then I go upstairs and I'm like, well, we're still not them. So what's the difference there?
I mean, you said it, it's small.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, it's everything is working around the edges of the issue because we don't actually want to deal with the issue. Now to be, well, it's not really true in New York. I mean, typically, what makes it so challenging is housing, right? Housing is not under the control of government. Most housing is private. And so to try to integrate housing becomes very hard. But of course, in New York, we have citywide choice. So, well, if you have money and access, you have citywide choice. Everyone else goes to the closest school in their neighborhood, right? But you ostensibly have choice. So you actually can have integration. You could in a city like New York. I know kids, parents put their kids on a train for an hour and a half if it's a quote unquote good school.
Mm-hmm.
But if you happen to live in the neighborhood with the good school, then all of a sudden you don't believe in busing or integration, right? Then you should go to the neighborhood school. So what the problem is, only ever wanting to do the small things, but not even being that committed to those. I mean, look at the conversation around sports. I don't have to tell you all of the academic research around how sports help students stay in school, how sports help students to achieve in school, how sports help students to stay out of trouble. We know all of the research, and yet the same kids we advantage in the classroom, we disadvantage in the classroom, we disadvantage outside of the classroom, right? We have no will, and this is again why, as Jill said, if you read the text of Brown, they're saying it doesn't matter if you equalize resources. And in fact, the South, in order to try to avoid a Supreme Court ruling, had begun to equalize resources to avert that ruling. What it said is, in a country built on racial caste, you will never create equality in those schools. And so it's a fallacy, right? We're like, oh, you know, I support them over there getting the same thing my kid gets. Now, mind you, my PTA is going to raise $1 million. Right? Mind you, okay, they don't have that many sports over there, but that's not our fault. So we never actually do fight for those other kids. And this is why integration becomes necessary. It was never about the idea that sitting next to a white child makes a black child smart. It clearly does not. But what it does is, if my child is in that class with your child, my child's getting what your child gets. That PTA that raises $1 million, my child gets the benefit of that. Right? When I was at 307, in a good year, we could raise $1,200. In a good year, we could raise $1,200. How can we ever compete with a PS8 or now a PS11, right? Where the complexion is different, but the economics are the same. Mm-hmm. So we know what works for a kid, but we also know, she said last question, and she was like, she's talking so long, you are out of time. I got you. I won't go that rogue, I promise. We know, you know, go look at your high quality high school. My daughter, who you all will be shocked, made a very different choice for her high school than what I would have chosen. But one thing that it has taught her is she's like, oh, this school is actually not good because of the teachers. She was like, it's the kids. I was like, yeah, that's what I've been trying to tell you. Right, but she's seeing that all these myths about a good school, well, yeah, if all of the kids in the school come from families that make $300,000 a year, they get private tutoring, they've been advantaged every moment of their life, we're shocked that school has high test scores. So integration works because it breaks up that advantage and it gives kids who have been disadvantaged in every other aspect of their life, we can't even share that one thing that's supposed to be public, that one thing. And so I think 10 years later, it's like, I think this is the hardest thing about the type of journalism I do, is there's journalism that transforms and there's journalism that just bears witness. And I've had to accept that all I can do is bear witness because what needs to be done, we've just never had the will to do it. And in fact, when David said, they were like, well, just stop making those schools like that. That's exactly what we do. We blame the kids, and we blame the communities that we have never given a fair shot for somehow not being able to overcome every obstacle we put in their ways, and then we pat ourselves on the back because our child excels when we've cleared everything out of their path.
Yes.
So I don't even know what I was answering, but that's what I want to say.
Thank you so much for your time. That's us. Thank you again for that wonderful conversation.
You're great. Even though you didn't get to ask me anything.
Listen, it was still great to learn. We are going to move it on to like a full panel Q&A, so y'all can start to ask some questions. So I'm going to invite Roberto Bailey to kind of facilitate this Q&A, and thank you again.
Another seat.
Okay, so unfortunately we got a lot of questions and we don't have a ton of time, so I'll start with this one. It says, we've talked a lot about challenges facing very under-enrolled segregated schools, but closures and mergers of these schools are often disruptive and painful. How do we increase access to opportunities for students in these schools without causing more harm? And I think this question can kind of go to anyone on the panel who has thoughts on this.
I'll take it. If we present something, if I said to you, if you do this thing, it will fight racism, it will build equity, it will help take on centuries and centuries of inequity, will you do it? Most of you would say yes. It is incumbent upon the Chancellor to be bold. Yes, we want integrated schools. I want integrated schools. Nikole wants integrated schools. So does David, for all the same reasons, because our separate schools aren't equal. But more importantly, it's because the one institution in a society rife with inequality, where we still believe that we ought to have equality, is our public schools. So don't let go of that. So we should say, our public schools serve the public interest, and all of our students need to be able to go to these schools. And so we're going to learn from the lessons of history. We're going to engage the students in the schools that maybe, if there's only 25 freshmen, I get it. It's a hard thing. But if you ask all of the change to be put upon the backs of the students who have the least, with no promise that we are building an anti-racist integrated system, then nobody's going to be for it, right? Nikole and I sat on a panel that said, where there's a will, there's a way. It is not hard to figure out how to create integrated schools in a city like New York. We're one of the most diverse cities in the world. What gets in the way is politics and privilege. So this is not hard to do. There are many, many, many bright people in the room and many bright people in the offices. What they need is a mass movement behind them that says, we demand that you do this. The teams at John Jay were combined in 2020, not because I asked, they'd already run me out of the school. It was because the people starting in Minneapolis rebelled when George Floyd was murdered, and the whole country rose up. And so, look, Minneapolis is taking the lead again. We've seen superintendents, of all people, and principals stand on the line to support immigrant students. It's inspiring as can be. I'm proud to call myself an educator when I look at what some of those principals and superintendents and teachers and students have done in Minneapolis. So that's on us. If we want to hold the Chancellor accountable, then we need to hold the Chancellor accountable. But they will listen to us, not when they're sitting quietly in their offices, but when the streets are full of people.
And if I could just add one thing. I think it's less painful to close a small school if you're offering something awesome for those students. And I think that's where the problem is. It's like, we're gonna close your school of 200 kids that has no auditorium and no field and no sports teams, but where are they gonna go? And at my old school, Bronx Letters, I actually worked on a project for a few years where we were trying to build a new school where we could collect all the small schools in our neighborhood in District 7 and be like, well, this is where we're all gonna go, into this awesome new building with a new field. And of course it ran into DOE bureaucracy, and we weren't able to accomplish the goal. But I think that is the problem is the DOE doesn't offer something that's awesome, and they just offer a closure or a merger. So I think we need to offer something awesome to students so that they don't feel attached to that, little environment that's not really an awesome education.
Yeah, could I just add, like, we have studied this for decades. It is not that we don't know what to do, it's that we won't do it. And we just need to be clear. We don't need not one more study. We don't need to figure it out. We know what to do. We will not do it. And if you don't have the will from the people, then that doesn't give the chancellor the cover to do the things that he needs to do. It has to come from the public. About the small schools, right? So we're closing these schools for academic performance often. And then we send the kids to an identical school. Right? We're not closing the school and sending them to a better academic setting. We're just sending them to one further away. Well, at the same time, we're opening brand new schools for white and Asian students. I mean, brand new. So we're both saying we have an under-enrollment problem and an over-enrollment problem because we're never gonna move those kids into the under-enrolled schools. But we'll shuffle poor black and brown kids all across this city and won't have a second thought about it. So again, what do we accept? Because it's not our children, and we have the power to ensure our children don't have to go through those things. The last thing I'll say, I live in Bedford-Stuyvesant, right? When I moved to Bed-Stuy, Bed-Stuy was 90% black. Bed-Stuy is now 44, 43. Look at the schools, though. You have a perfect opportunity to integrate without having to move a single person, and yet we don't. So you'll move into the neighborhood, but you won't send your kids to the neighborhood schools. Or you'll say, what school can we take over? Or you'll open your own little private or charter school. So we could do things very easily. A transitioning neighborhood should be the easiest neighborhood to integrate. You have a brief period where you can do so. And I'll keep saying the last thing, this is really the last thing, right? If you remember, y'all remember the pandemic? Briefly after the pandemic, right, the district serving Park Slope, they admitted students to that middle school based on lottery. No more screening, right? If you put in the lottery, you got picked by lottery, and it worked. All the threats, right? They said, oh, all the white parents are gonna leave if you do this. They didn't. And then we gave up on it. It's like, even when it works, we don't have the will to do what we need to do. So again, like, I don't know how you build the will. I don't know how you sustain the will, but our problem is not knowing the solutions. The problem is those of us who have power only use our power for ourselves.
All right, and for our last question, we've talked about and thought about kind of how the promises of Brown v. Board have not been fulfilled at this critical anniversary. So where do we go from here? What actions can people in this audience take away? And if you could limit your answer to one sentence, like one hard thing to do, but what do you want people to take away in one sentence? And we can start with Jill.
March. March, organize. And the thing I will also say to Samuels is stop punishing the educators who do it. Get out there and demand it.
I mean, coming from a student perspective in that time, I did use my voice. And I spoke up about what we wanted, and I reported on the things that we went through in a small school. And even you as parents, you do have the opportunity to give your child a voice and also integrate. We need integration. Everyone needs equal opportunities.
I would just say start with your own child. You become an example to every other parent who says, I can't do it. I wish I could. Start with your own child. Every time someone comes to me, yesterday, one of my mentees was jogging. She was like, oh, it's time to enroll our kid in school, and I just wanted to talk to you. I was like, you already know what I'm gonna say. We don't have to talk about anything because I'm not absolving you of anything. You know what to do. So I think everyone has to start with the decision you make about your own child, because you can't advocate for someone else to do something that you won't do.
Yeah.
That's a lot of pressure to have the last word. I didn't want to be last. I guess, I don't know, I mean, I'm a teacher again. I went back into the classroom, so I'm teaching U.S. history, and my hope is that more Shafus emerge from my classroom by teaching them about King's 6 Steps of Nonviolent Social Change and, you know, their ability. Like, we're fighting in my school now just to get, 30, 40 broken windows fixed and, ceilings that are falling down on the kids. And the DOE, once again, is just ignoring us. So I'm teaching them, once again, like, how to protest and how to fight. And so it won't be for sports this time. It'll be like, could we not have broken windows all over our building? So that's my hope, is that the students will keep fighting.
Thank you all. Please give one huge round of applause again for our panelists tonight. As we commemorate the legacy of Brown v. Board, we know that this conversation does not end here. The work of building a more just and equitable school system continues, and as we've heard tonight, that work belongs to each and every single one of us. At the Bell, we train and support student journalists as they report on issues like school segregation and inequities shaping their schools and communities. Our reporting has revealed racial inequities, not just in sports and admissions, but also in who has access to journalism. And I'm proud to share that the Bell is leading a coalition of partners working to change that reality. This school year, through the Journalism for All initiative, 30 schools all over the city have launched new journalism courses, opening access to hundreds of students. That means more students can have the kinds of experiences Roberto, Aponi, and our other student journalists have had. The chance to report on critical issues shaping our schools and to amplify student voices. Members of that team are here tonight. So I'd love to shout out any member or supporter of the Youth Journalism Coalition. Can you please stand? And let's give them a round of applause. CJ, Sophie, Kate, Kyle, thank you guys.
Miseducation is produced by The Bell. Thank you to all of our panelists, the Center for Brooklyn History, and Marsha Eli. We also want to thank Chancellor Kamar Samuels for opening remarks. In the first live recorded panel, you heard from Jill Bloomberg, Renika Jack, and David Garcia Rosen, moderated by me, Sabrina Duquesne. In the second discussion, you heard Aponi Kafele in conversation with Nikole Hannah-Jones. The Q&A was moderated by Roberto Bailey. Mira Gordon provided editing and production support. Our executive editor is Taylor McGraw. Our technical director is Jake Loomis. Music is from APM Music and Blue Dot Sessions. This is also available on video. You can find the link in our show notes. Thanks for tuning in.